Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. It's with a heavy heart that we let everyone know here that our dear friend and colleague, Ted Butler, who had been a pioneer in the arena of silver analysis and newsletter writing for decades and decades, has passed away. We heard this news over the weekend, and I have here our guest, David Morgan, who knew Ted for longer than I did, to join me in honoring him and in his memory. David, thank you for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Well, Dunagun, thanks for asking me.
I wish it were a happier occasion for us, either of us. I feel the first words that came to my mind when I heard the news was that we lost a good man. As with many, including yourself, Ted was a tireless fighter and always pursuing the truth where he could find it and trying to get the word out to people about many aspects of silver and about his passionate desire for free markets. And he was a outspoken critic of what he felt were improper markets. And I think you'll maybe be able to give us some more backstory on that. And I just wanted to share a few personal insights of my honor that I have from having been able to interview Ted over the years, and give you a chance to tell us more about him and your relationship with him and his work and his memory. One of the things that I wanted to share was that the very first silver eagle that I ever held in my hand was gifted to me by a local investment advisory firm in Minnesota where we were living at the time. And with it came a paper printed copy of Ted Butler's silver newsletter. And I read it with great interest. And then the month later after that, there came another copy of the next edition of his newsletter, and then the third one on the third month. And I remembered that very vividly because as my son Elijah got me involved in sound money through his homeschooling, and then into podcasting by his example as well, I finally reached out to Ted in 2018. So that was 6 years ago, and started having him on what was then Reluctant Prepper is the name of our channel, and had him on numerous times over the years. But through all of the interactions that I had with Ted in those interviews and in the negotiating his availability and timing of them and et cetera, the topics we were going to discuss, was continually impressed with his just earth-grounded sincerity of what he believed and what he was trying to help communicate and to educate people on the importance of sound money, the importance of silver, both its investment and industrial uses, and then the passion that he had for what he felt was a need for cleaning house in the silver markets, and what would be a brighter future for many if that were to happen. And I'm grieved to know that we lost him, and I'm sure he's in a better place. And just grateful for the times that I had to learn from him and to spend in his presence. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, because I think it might have been you that got me connected with him in the first place, as far as providing a introduction so that I could invite him on our channel. And so I'm quite confident you had a longer associate relationship with him than I did, and would be happy if you could share that with our viewers.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I think the first thing I wanted to say is that I would highly recommend, and I'll do this, after our interview, that you get a hold of Ed Steer. Ed and I go back almost as far as Ted and I go back. And Ed had a very strong relationship with Ted up until probably the very end. I did not. I mean, I still spoke to him from time to time, but really didn't have that tight a relationship with him for the last several years. Although I usually read, anything he put out in the public forum. But the way it all started was pretty interesting. As some people know, very few know, that I adopted the internet early. I think a lot of people know that. And I had, a computer. And back in those days when I started, there was no browser. So you had to get on the internet with a C prompt to type in, what the destination would be. And there were just what they call these BBCs or BBSs, I forget, their bulletin boards in certain groups. And then, of course, the browser came out and all that. I just said that to say this, that one of the first websites devoted to precious metals was called Gold Eagle. And I'm pretty certain that's where I saw the first writing about silver on Gold Eagle. And it was Ted. And I read it and I go, wow, somebody's writing about silver, not gold. And it's refreshing. And this guy knows what he's talking about. So I got a hold of the white page. And I don't remember how I figured out he was in Florida, because Ted Butler is a fairly common name. But I think it was by his bio that Vronsky would put up on everybody that wrote and posted on Gold Eagle. Anyway, somehow I figured out I was in Florida, or I might have figured out I was Jupiter, Florida. So I looked up at Ted Butler, Jupiter, Florida, and he was listed in the white pages. So I just took a chance, called him up and said, hi, is this Ted Butler that's on Gold Eagle? And he said, yes, it is. So I introduced myself, and I had a chat with him. And then Jim Cook of Investment Rarities had just written a new book on gold. And I forget the name. Forgive me, Jim. My memory's not perfect. But I took that book. I'd read it. I packaged it up. I mailed it to Ted. And then I introduced Jim to Ted's work via an email. And I said, I've, met this guy on the internet. His name's Ted Butler. He writes about, silver market. This is some of his work, and I gave him the, contact points. Well, Ted got the book, and he called me back and he said, guess what? And I said, well, what? And he said, the guy that wrote the book? I go, yeah, I know him. He called me up. And whatever. And that's what started the relationship with the Jim Cook newsletter, Investment Rarities newsletter, with Ted Butler, is that I had connected them, and they obviously hit it off. And Ted wrote for him, as far as I know, up until the end. And so that's just one of those things. And then as Ed worked actually with the Casey Group so I'm switching from Ted to Ed. Ed Steer started writing for Doug Casey, and he does a daily, which, I'm so glad my business is not set up that way, because it's a real demand to have to write every single day. But anyway, Ed did that, and then he left Casey, and he continued to write it under his own, his own business, and became quite friendly with Ted. I think I connected Ted and Ed. I don't recall for sure. It's really not material that I did or didn't. But anyway, they did connect. And I want to, now that I gave you kind of the big picture of how it all came about, I want to backtrack and tell you that when I first met Ted via the telephone, he was extremely generous with his time and explaining the commitment of traders. Even though I had traded futures and made a living at it for a while, there were things about it. And he was a futures broker at one time. And, I'll just get it out of the way. I guess there was some problem in the orange juice market at one point. I don't know all the details. I'm not really going to comment on it. I mean, Ted's as human as anybody, but he certainly took a stance on the silver market, as you all know. So coming back on point, I had a vague understanding of, the futures market. I knew, like, if you're a commercial, you get like a 30% discount, because the idea, which I think was okay at the time, everything's been so distorted. But if you were a wheat farmer and you actually produced the product, you wouldn't have to put up as much margin as a speculator, because you actually have the product. So the CME, Commodities Mercantile Exchange, said, okay, Mr. Farmer of wheat or soybeans or cotton or cocoa or whatever, since you actually produce the commodity that you're trading or hedging, then you don't have to put margin. Well, I think that's fair. At least it was initially. The problem is that, of course, as I said, things are so distorted, and there aren't many producers of silver that even play in the futures market. It's the banking system, particularly the bullion banking system. So I'm a little off track. So Ted was very patient with me. He took me through the Commitment of Traders report, line by line, item by item. And I don't know what the time duration was, but I'd say, a couple hours on one call, maybe 2 or 3 more, then a couple more calls until, I had it down and understood it. And he didn't charge me. He was happy to teach me. And that was something that in those days, all he really talked about was leasing of silver. Leasing. That's what he wrote about for the first few years. And then that kind of left the scene and he started more or less on other topics. But I always, I have to say, admired the fact that, he was pretty bold. I mean, he did not mind calling these guys crooks. He put it in writing all the time. And he was instrumental not only in waking people up on how the futures markets work, which is not just the silver market that has these issues, although the silver market's probably the number one or number two. I think oil's probably right neck and neck with silver as far as the distortions in the market. But regardless of my opinion, still, he did cause the CFTC some restless nights, I'm certain, because he would mount these campaigns. He'd start with a letter that he wrote, and he'd say, you can copy it, you can copy it and sign it, you can modify it, you can take certain things out. And, they got flooded with inquiries about what's going on in the silver market. And that happened, to my knowledge, a couple times. Ed would be better on that than me, but certainly giving you the best of my memory of what happened. So, well known. I don't think there's anybody that took the silver market seriously that didn't learn about Ted Butler and what he wrote. And in his private work, which for a while was, I would kind of tease him a little bit. I'd say, you've got the URL Butler Research, but you don't have a newsletter, because I went right into the newsletter business, the financial newsletter, and he hadn't, because he's writing for Jim Cook every month or every couple of weeks, at least once a month, not every other week kind of thing. And that went on and on and on. I thought, well, is he even going to bother? Because, he's getting paid by Jim. I don't know what he's getting paid, probably fairly well. And that was that. But no, eventually he did. He started Butler Research. I subscribed to it for, I think, about 2 years, and I dropped off. But I don't know what else to say other than it was a real shock that he passed away. I will remember, again, his kindness and his mentorship on that specific aspect of the futures markets and how the commemorative traders. And, as much as I learned from him, there's no real perfection in reading the COT report. It's like a barometer, not a thermometer. You don't get an exact temperature. You get a trend. You don't know, the bad weather's ahead. You just don't know, is it a day away, a week away, or a month away, that kind of thing. But you do get a general feel for it. But, I've read his stuff from IRI, Investment Areas Incorporated, most of the time when I wasn't a subscriber to him directly. And in all fairness, and you could say the same thing about me, is, he had some pretty good calls and he had some that were pretty far off. I mean, he would write, the way it's set up now, I'm pretty, I'm almost certain that this is going to happen and that they're caught and whatever. And, it looked like it because you get a great big rally and then the whole game would start over, I call it. And the banks would come in start pounding the market down, and flush out the other side. They would take a loss and then the game would start over. So hopefully I didn't overdo it. I just think I wanted to acknowledge for everybody that at one point it was he and I were really about the only two writing about silver, in the early days, 1999. And now you've got more than I could name. But it's a good thing. That's a good thing. We want honest money. We want sound money. We want freedom. And we want all those things that go along with what I think go along with the silver and gold market.
The other thing I think, David, that you share in common is wanting free and fair markets. And you've spoken about that at conferences where I've seen you as the keynote speaker. And in the spirit of, I guess, Ted's passion for that, did you have anything of your own to add about free markets, about why they're essential, and whether we're making any progress in your view over the broad, when you say looking at the broad trend in that regard, something that was so near and dear to his heart and yours?
Well, I can't really speak for him, but I will for myself. And that is there's a paper done, I think was done by Sprott. I think John Embry had a lot to do with it if he didn't write or edit the whole thing. It's called Not Free, Not Fair. And Gatta, I think, reprinted it. Again, my best of my memory. And it really went into a fair amount of detail. If you don't have a free market, if you don't have a fair market, you don't really have a market. And what that does, these distortions do to the general populace and the other side. Because if it's not fair for one, it's not fair for all, then, what are we doing? And of course, they made several examples. So Ted was more of a individualist. I mean, he really, drummed to his own drum. He does not really align with anybody. I mean, he would mention Gatta and, agree with them or note them. But he was the commander in chief of the Commitment of Traders Report. That's really about his mainstay, what he focused on. He did focus on, some of the fundamentals and stuff. But if you get to the heart of the issue, he was constantly nearly obsessed with what the banking cartel was doing in the silver market and why it was wrong. And he spent his whole life really trying to right that wrong. And that's how I see it. I'm sure others may see it somewhat differently, but, I was fairly close to him at one time. And again, I just want to repeat, I really think it'd be good as a follow-up if you could I'll connect with Ed because, like Ed talked to him almost daily, I'm sure, and I didn't. And that would probably give you some pretty good, insights, especially later in life. I think my opinion is that as this market moved onward and for the last 25 years or so that he wrote about it and I've written about it, I think he became more and more aware of the devastation that a debasement of a currency does for society at large. When he initially started, I invited him to an interview with me on something he'd written about the USGS, saying that silver was going to be the first element to be extinct off of the periodic table. He came down and met with me, and he drove from Jupiter to Fort Lauderdale, which is a long haul, and met with him. And then he got there. He really decided he didn't want to do it. He said that he felt he was more powerful by the pen rather than on the TV camera. And that was it. And I honored that. I kind of felt bad in a way because it was a long drive, but he decided on at the last minute that he didn't, want the interview. And I said, fine, I'll abide by that. So back to you.
Well, David, we really appreciate you taking the time out to reminisce and to connect the dots for us about our relationships as they each grew individually with Ted Butler. We're going to miss him. And I know that Gatta carries on with the mission of rallying for free markets, and as does like John Adams of Australia and others. So, and yourself. And we're here about trying to get the word out, trying to make sure that as many people as possible find out about the importance of sound money while there's still time to take protective action for themselves, their families, and their futures. And you're a big part of that. And we will all miss Ted's wit and wisdom along the way. And we'll include some clips that he did together with me on Reluctant Preppers or Liberty and Finance. And hope that that's as meaningful to our viewers and subscribers as it is to me. And I know it's been a big part of your early roots of being one of the only silver newsletter writers, and helping to encourage Ted in that same regards is wonderful. And just thank you for being with us, David, and always having been here for our viewers over the decades.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.